But it's great to have you guys here on our virtual bridge. And wow, I'm really looking forward to having a great chat with you guys about the ocean. Um, Maybe in particular one part of the ocean, which very few people have ever been to, but you guys have. And then, yeah, I'm sure we'll tell a few stories as well. We've got a bunch of questions that have been submitted by Students on Ice alumni. So away we go. But I think I'm reaching you both somewhere in rural Oregon, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yeah, southern coastal Oregon, in the coastal range, and Dad's over at the big house. I'm in the keep, and we technology is working quite well now that we've moved up to DSL, so we're no longer on satellites. Exciting times.
Very exciting times, and that's quite the metropolis that you both live in. I understand, in Oregon.
Yeah, we're pushing 150 people.
Wow, things are growing.
Yeah, we're outnumbered by the elk.
Say 10. Yeah, that's true. In fact, if I look out my window here to my left across the pasture, and there is a resident herd of about 31 Roosevelt elk, and the large ones up to 1,000 pounds. So they're fearsome critters. I mean, they're very docile and very wary, skittish, but if they spook and start running, they'll go right through a fence. You know, deer jump over, but elk just go straight through it. And now you got to restring the fence.
And are those 31 elk part of the 150 population there?
Kelly?
They're grandfathered in. They don't have voting rights yet. It's like Washington, D.C.
Of course, they're more intelligent than some of the voters around here, I might add.
This is being edited for clarity later, right, Jeff?
Anyway, let's get back on track. First and foremost, you are both Students on Ice alumni. You've both been on multiple expeditions, Arctic and Antarctic. So you are part of the SOI family, and that's really a big part of the audience that'll be we'll be sharing this interview with. Don, your history with Students on Ice goes right back to the very beginning, when we were just talking about the concept of Students on Ice. And I'll always remember how I first met you, because we were going on another expedition to Antarctica. We were at the dock in Ushuaia. I was the expedition leader, and for some reason we were minutes away from setting sail and doing our introductory briefing. And I met you as you were coming up the gangway, and I basically just said, "Hi, I'm Jeff. Who are you? I need to know how to introduce you." And because I had no idea who Don Walsh was, and Don said, "Just tell them I'm an oceanographer from Oregon." Little did I know that Don indeed was an oceanographer, is an oceanographer, but you're a whole lot more than that. And I want to do a little intro of you in a second, just to embarrass you. And then Kelly, you've been on 7 Students on Ice expeditions now, I think.
Six. It would have been 7 this year, but yeah, six since 14.
Since 2014.
Yeah.
And been big part of our expedition team on those journeys, and Zodiac driver. And so it's really great to connect with both you today. This episode of The Bridge is focused on the ocean. So we really want to just hear your connection to the ocean, some stories, and a little bit maybe about the future. Where do you think the opportunities and challenges lie, particularly for this younger generation, vis-a-vis the ocean and careers and action? But Don, there's probably there might not be anybody else in the world that has been more immersed in the ocean, literally, but in ocean issues, policies, innovation, and leadership than you. From your dive with Jacques Piccard in the bathyscaphe Trieste to the deepest part of the world ocean in 1960, the Mariana Trench, to all the other things you've been doing in your life. You've been called one of the world's greatest explorers by Life magazine. If we went through all the awards you received, we'd probably take up this entire interview. But the Hubbard Medal from National Geographic, advisor to 5 presidents on oceans, honorary president of the Explorers Club, member of the Ocean Elders. There's even something in Antarctica named after you, the Walsh Spur, which you might have to describe to us. And the list goes on. I forgot how many times you've been to the bottom of, or to see the Titanic as well. More than a dozen, I think. So it's just, from that moment I met you, Don, until today, it's been an honor to become your friend and have you so closely associated with Students on Ice. You've been, if you don't mind me saying, one of the grandfathers of Students on Ice, and we probably wouldn't be here without you. And Kelly, you've picked up that torch and carried it. You kind of have, the ocean, it sounds like, has pulled you back to it at this stage in your life, even though I imagine the ocean's been a part of your life from the very beginning because of all the stories you'd hear from your dad coming home. And I often said I'd never be a teacher because my dad was an educator. And of course, the very first job I got was as a teacher, and I'm an educator. So you are following in your dad's footsteps, but I'd love to hear a bit more about that. And recently you've become so connected to the ocean that you've been featured in stories around the world, Forbes magazine, the Daily Mail. It's pretty exciting stuff. So with that as a bit of an intro to who you both are and what you mean to Students on Ice, let's have a free-flowing conversation. And maybe to start, where should we start? What brought you, Don? Maybe we'll start with SOI. What brought you to being part of SOI, and why have you stayed a part of it for so long? What is it that you think makes it what it is?
Well, Jeff, as you'll recall, you're just too modest to tell the story, so I'll tell it. I was working with Hapag-Lloyd on their expedition cruise ship, Hanseatic, in the Antarctic. And you were our expedition leader once, more than once, maybe. Anyway, considering the demographics of our guests, usually by 9 o'clock at night, they'd had their hot cocoa and cookies, and we're in the crib. Because remember, we worked them pretty hard. I remember when we start out that first night, when you introduce everybody, all of the staff and such, you also remind our guests that this was not a vacation. This was not a holiday. This was an expedition. So we sometimes get them out on the ice 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and sometimes in the evening. And they're pretty tired critters by 9 in the evening. So it was too early for us. So we'd repair to the bar and have a jar or 2 of red wine. And you started to tell me about this dream you had. And that was to take young people to these most sensitive places on our planet, the polar regions. And while our guests were self-selected in that they had money, they were well educated, and they wanted to know stuff. That's what, because expedition cruise ships aren't particularly comfortable compared to luxury cruise ships. And so we were imparting important message, education, if you will, to these people, but they were kind of at the end of their lifespan, even though they were learning stuff. And you wanted to get them at the beginning of a lifespan, if you will, these young people, the students. And as you pointed out to me, by looking at mostly upper division high school, that is the junior and senior level age groups. Uh, these are young people are maybe just 4 years away from the ballot box wherever you live. And these are important things that happen on our planet. They've got to go see it first, and they have to have people like us to help interpret what they're seeing and why it's important, how it relates to the whole world. And so I'm hearing you kind of, a stream of unconsciousness as you were telling me all these ideas you had. And I thought to myself, if he pulls it off, I got to be part of that. So I'd like to, accept all your acclaim for being so important in the beginning of it. All I did was kind of nod my head and go, and keep your wine glass topped up. And sure enough, you pulled it off, and here we are. And so I went on the first two, the Antarctic, on a rather unfortunate ship, which disappeared in the Atlantic somewhere. Nobody aboard. Canadian government just towed it out into the ocean and it disappeared. That was the Glub Glub Orlova. You remember that ship? That's where I thought if the plague were to hit the world again, that was ground zero. And then we did an Arctic one on ex-Russian ship, the Yafa, I believe it was. So that's like, I got into it right away. And regrettably, every year, bless your heart, you'd invite me back, but it always seemed to conflict with some of the other things because I was doing a lot of work with the various expedition ship companies, and I always had more invitations to go to sail with them than I had time to take them. So I always got kind of cross-threaded with SOI. But I'm happy I got back in the last few years, the last decade, let's say, and especially being able to take Kelly with me on one. And now here he is. He just signed on, doing it all by himself as a staff member, Zodiac driver, and so on. You never let me drive Zodiacs. I guess you just didn't trust me with that fancy stuff, but maybe someday I'll get a chance to drive one. So that's how I came into it.
Yeah.
I was probably your first follower, the kind of Pied Piper of the polar regions. And because I've seen you on these expeditions, these young people following you around and learning stuff just every minute. And it's been an amazing thing. And I'm just so keen on that program because we're really, as you said, giving them life-changing experiences. They're not the same young people after just 10 or 12 days with us and Students on Ice as they were before. And then with your very vigorous alumni program, you're fostering that follow-on, keeping in touch with them. And in 20 years of existence, SOI now has a pretty good baseline, if you will, of performance. How many came through the program, from what countries, and what did they do later? Because I remember the first couple of times, we had a lot of young people that I think thought it was some kind of summer camp, and they unlearned that in a hurry once they got aboard. It was an education, and it was life-changing. Many of them I talked to, I remember talking to them on the first ship in the Antarctic, were not particularly interested in going to university at all. Get out of high school and get a job somewhere, and that was that. And a whole lot of those people really changed. Some, I guess, today now have PhDs. They're working in global environmental affairs, ocean issues, and so on. So that's very rewarding.
Yeah. Well,
so that's my story. And by the way, thanks for the overly generous introduction. I write my own PR, so I think you could probably cut everything in half and it'd be more truthful.
Well, or triple it or quadruple it, more likely, Mr. Walsh. But well, those are some great reflections to hear, Don. And indeed, it was those early expeditions with adults, I think, and seeing how profoundly impacted many of them were by visiting the polar regions is what inspired the Students on Ice dream, imagining what we could do, what would happen if youth at the beginning of their life would have that opportunity. And here we are.
Well, you don't have to imagine it anymore. You've got hard data.
That's crazy, eh? 20 years later, here we are.
Was it 2,700 data points now?
More than that. I think we're at 3,300.
Wow.
And indeed, well, 2 weeks ago, our alumni summit was just an example of the impact that experience has had on youth and what they've gone on to do and what they're doing every day. It gives a lot of cause for hope when we definitely need that. And Kelly, what about you? Like, you probably didn't know quite what you were getting into on that first SOI expedition, but what made you want to come back?
Boy, I think the first 2014, we had just come from a Lindblad expedition in, I think it was Greenland, Iceland, and we hopped on a plane and flew to Ottawa. And I kind of knew what, in broad strokes, what to expect, but I had no idea the amount of energy that surrounded the whole endeavor. The just from point, as soon as we landed to as soon as we left Ottawa to go home, the sheer energy that and commitment from everybody was something I'd never experienced. I was not an educator, but I know how hard educators work, and I know how intense it can be. I had no idea when you put that model into a confined space where the kids cannot get away, and nor can the staff, what happens. And it's amazing. It really is. I could not have pictured what it would be like the first time. And I already knew I wanted to be more involved with the operational stuff. I love boats. I love getting out, and I mean, one of my favorite things is to deliver people from the ship to the shore and watch them on shore, and actually be offshore a little bit and just watch big picture, watch everything happening on shore. And maybe with some people on the boat that want to go fishing, or that want to do a plankton trawl, or something like that. Being able to see that develop every day, from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. Was incredible. It's addictive. It really is. This year informed me that I was addicted to that experience, because there's nothing like it. It changes everybody on the ship. Those people that come back year after year are changed every year. I've never seen people. I see some confused looks by certain folks that what just happened to me. But for the most part, it's just this overarching, exhausted euphoria at the end of it, and you can't get that anywhere else. And case in point, last year I went from SOI. I came home thinking, okay, I can rest for a bit. And Adventure Canada had a couple of people that had to drop out, expedition staff. And so I raised my hand, and I got back on a plane and went to Toronto, and went off with AC to another expedition. So I got to see same ship, same crew, different passengers, and it quite enjoyable, because Adventure Canada is an amazing company and they have amazing clients. But the atmosphere was night and day. The questions asked, the presentations, all valid, all very good, just quite different. And of course, the energy level was considerably different. I could maybe go to bed a little bit earlier, things like that. But yeah, with Students on Ice, it's just been every year. I think, my goodness, that was exhausting, but the euphoria overrides that, and I look forward to the next year every time.
Thank you, Kelly. Somebody the other day described a typical Students on Ice expedition as being Olympian, and I think that is a good way of describing it. And I'm so glad you guys have both been a part of it, and looking forward to having you involved for years to come once we can get back out there. And Dawn, we talked a little bit before this started, and you're turning 90 years old next year, which is hard to believe, but you won't be the first 90-year-old on a Students on Ice expedition. So we're going to make that happen, but maybe not as a Zodiac driver. And Kelly, one of the coolest things about your biography, which I didn't add, but you own 2 Zodiacs, which puts you like in the upper echelons of my admiration category.
Well, yeah, it'll soon be 3. One of them's in Achilles, but that's the one I'll let my dad practice on, just in case you put him behind the tiller.
Yeah.
He can ride the Achilles.
Yeah, give him a few lessons, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is this place in the world ocean called the Mariana Trench or Challenger Deep. It's the deepest part of the ocean, as far as we know. And Don, you made history on January 23rd, 1960, when you were one of the first 2 people ever to go down to that part of the planet, the deepest part of the ocean. And 60 years later, Kelly, Don, your son, went down there too. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing. You have to tell me how many people now have been down there. Until recently, it was only a handful. But my goodness, I mean, a lot of the questions that came in from alumni wanted to ask you about this. And I guess one of the first questions was, can you describe your feelings on arriving at Challenger Deep? And Don, one thing I saw you say was it was the best Father's Day present ever when Kelly got down there. But Don, maybe start with you. What were your feelings more than 60 years ago?
Well, it was a feeling of great pride on behalf of my team, because we're just 14 of us, but only 2 of us could fit in the submersible, that we had done what we said we were going to do, and we did it on time and on price, on budget, which in the Navy, US Navy, is kind of rare. Maybe not doing things on time so much as on budget. But we had worked really hard for many months at Guam doing progressively deeper test dives. So this wasn't just taking the bathyscaphe out and dropping it in the water and doing the deep dive. We'd started out in the harbor at Guam a few hundred feet and worked our way offshore, increasingly deeper water. By November 1959, we'd gotten down to around 18,000 feet. And then early January of 1960, we got to 24,000 feet. And about 10 days later, we did the ultimate dive to the deepest place, which was about 35,800 feet deep, roughly. So the feeling was of immense satisfaction and accomplishment, but not just for me, but for all our people that had worked so hard, 7 days a week. As one of the older members of our team said, and he was pushing 50 in those days, it's the only job he ever had to sneak up in the dark and leave after dark, because we were putting in, half day work days, 12 to 12 hours. And so it was a good day at the office.
Now, for those that might not know this, so really Challenger Deep has been described as the Mount Everest of the ocean. It's almost the same depth as Everest is height.
About a mile.
About a mile difference?
Yeah, it's about a mile deeper than Mount Everest is high, even with the new measurement.
Okay. And that measurement, meters might not make sense to everybody. It's about 7 miles deep, isn't it, to get down there?
Yeah.
So Kelly, here you were last summer. What was going through your mind? What was it like? What were you feeling?
Well, this was not something that I had planned on doing ever. It just seemed like, something I grew up with, that my dad had done. And while he'd done so many other things in ocean advocacy and science, this was a big event. I wasn't born when it happened. So, but it it was part of my life. Got to go on the Cameron expedition and watch from the ship the Jim Cameron going down for the first time since my dad and Jacques were down there. Again, I had no thought, I'm going to do that someday. It was not, who thinks that? No one. And then this year in January, Victor Vescovo and Caladan Oceanic asked if I would like to do it. And, I had to think about it for a little while, and I'm kidding, of course. Of course I said yes immediately. And, it hit me, well, of course, with the pandemic and everything, there was some, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Guam is not easy to get to in regular times. More difficult now. And so a lot of things had to fall into place, not least of which the team at Triton and Caladan and EOS putting together this amazing expedition had balls in the air everywhere. I was not the only person diving. Kathy Sullivan, astronaut, former head of NOAA. I mean, there were people with pedigrees far beyond mine that were also going on some dives. They had a lot of things to deal with, and so I was realistic about the possibilities of it maybe not happening. Once I landed in Guam, however, it seemed more real. And technically, the sub worked. We're going down, and luckily, I was on the first dive on the second series, so I knew within a day and a half of leaving Guam that I was getting in that sub and going to the western pool of Challenger Deep, it's the first time anybody had been back there since my dad and Jacques. All previous dives and subsequent dives, frankly, have been to the central or the eastern pools. The Chinese have just been down there. I don't know where they went, but I doubt it was the western pool. So to go back to where he went was pretty incredible. Victor had high hopes of maybe finding the ballast that Trieste dropped to go to resurface, but as was pointed out, 60 years of sediment, and who knows what condition the steel shot would be in. We didn't find it. We found some trash, of course, but
did you really?
No, it was fiber optic or some sort of tether to an AUV or an RUV, there was a lot of it, and it was getting kind of, I wouldn't say dangerous from a life. We weren't in peril, but if we got tangled in it, we'd have to drop some very expensive equipment to get out of it. So we made note of that. So anybody visiting the western pool now has to be aware that there's trash down there.
Wow.
And so no place is untouched.
No. Interesting. Wow. And besides that, what else did you see?
So I saw a whole lot more than my dad did, because we knew from Victor's prior dives in 2019, the submersible, the limiting factor is as different from the Trieste as the space shuttle is from a Buick. And sorry, Dad, but I mean, it's an evolution, right, of technology, and that's why I wasn't. And people ask, were you scared? No, they've done it before. They have total confidence in their equipment, and I had total confidence in the teams. So that was not an issue. But we settled down. Victor called out depth all the way down. He was a very good tour guide. We would pass the crushed depth of Navy submarines, and he would call that out. It's like we were at Titanic depth, where he would call out the various depths of famous landmarks around the world and whatnot. And finally, we made it to 35,853 feet. And we settled down without so much as a bump. And so we didn't stir up the sediment like they did in the Trieste, because the Trieste didn't have all the fancy equipment we have, and was able to settle down, look at the surface of the seafloor, and it looked like, I assume, the surface of the moon. It really, I didn't see any life. We know it's down there because in prior dives they would set some bait out in the landers that were sent down in concert with our submersible, and they contained some bait and would very quickly get devoured by deep sea creatures. And I know there's video of that out there and pictures and whatnot, but I didn't see any. I didn't see any life forms. Light disappeared, and it was pitch black except for our spotlights. And we were the only living things down there that I noticed.
And with those differences in technologies, did that change the time it took for Don from when you went to get down to Kelly's descending time?
Let's put it in perspective, Jeff. That's 60 years elapse of the advancement of technology and technique. 60 years before I made my dive, the airplane hadn't even been invented. It's been invented, but it hadn't flown. The Wright brothers were going to fly in about 3 more years, 57 years. So I think that can give you an idea of, I would have expected nothing less. After we surfaced from our dive, Jacques and I were waiting to be picked up by a Zodiac to take to the mothership. And we were kind of discussing when somebody might be along to do it again. And I thought he was wildly pessimistic. We agreed on 2 years, but I thought he was wildly pessimistic, saying 2 years. Certainly next year, somebody will come out and start doing work there. Because remember, we were not scientists or oceanographers. I was a submarine officer in the United States Navy, not somebody that knew much about the ways of ocean science. We were test pilots, like a new airplane. The Office of Naval Research, our Navy, had purchased the Trieste as a platform, a working platform for oceanographers. So it was our job to kind of wring it out like a new airplane, make sure it was safe and reliable and productive. And so we were not scientists. You had 2 engineers, if you will, diving this thing. So that was really our mandate, and we did it, and we proved that the ultimate test would work well, but it was pretty primitive gear. And yet the bathyscaphe, the basic design of that type of submersible, prevailed in our Navy for nearly a quarter of a century. If you really wanted to go into the deepest part of the ocean, that's what you had to do. So the US Navy had 3 of them sequentially, and the French Navy, the only other organization in the world that had bathyscaphes, they had 2 of them. And so up until really the very early 1980s, if you want to go in the deepest part of the ocean, that's how you did it. So the evolution was quick but slow. And Kelly, you haven't answered the question yet, and so I'm going to mention he got deeper. If you paid attention to the number he gave you, and they stayed longer. We stayed 20 minutes. He stayed what, 4 hours?
4 hours. 4 hours down, 4 hours on the bottom, 4 hours back up.
And how many people have gone to Challenger Deep now?
Well, I was 11. So 12, 13, 13, and then whatever the Chinese total was from these prior dives. There's not a lot of information about those yet, I don't think.
We've, by the way, Jeff, we've been invited, Kelly and I have been invited to go out and visit with the Chinese team, when and if the COVID thing moderates a bit. So maybe sometime next year we'll get a chance to actually go see that submarine.
That
And
might be them calling right now.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you turn that damn thing off. Joan's supposed to be monitoring the phone so that we're
Well,
left alone for important stuff.
we might have to get a submersible on a future Students on Ice expedition. What do you guys think about that?
It'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, Triton has all the sizes, so
Yeah. Well, we'll give Triton a call. I understand that
Oh.
the president is a Canadian, so
Yeah.
we'll pull some Canadian hearts.
Yeah.
And I say that not entirely in jest about a future Students on Ice expedition. So stay tuned, as they say. I want to just shift a little bit to, like, you guys have, because of your broad experiences on the ocean, none the least of which being visitors to the Marianas Trench. What is the significance, do you think, of the Marianas Trench to the ocean at large? And you guys now have, Don, you've had a platform for 60 years as an ambassador of the ocean, and Kelly, you now have that platform. What are you thinking about the future? Like, this is a critical decade coming up, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Life on land needs a healthy ocean. That's much more clear than it was probably 60 years ago. But no specific question, just your thoughts there on the significance of all of this.
Well, when we did it, it basically was insignificant, not the attainment, but was more of a record or a great adventure, which was never our intention. The Office of Naval Research bought this as a serious platform for doing deepest ocean scientific work. But because of the uniqueness of the event, and it was kind of a one-off because it was so long between return trips, it became something of a singular adventure or exploration. Today, with what Victor's been doing, these repetitive dives that he's been doing in the deepest parts of the world ocean, it wasn't just Challenger Deep. Last year, he had this 5 Deeps expedition where he systematically dove to the deepest place in each of the 5 oceans. So those are all whole lot of trenches around the world: Puerto Rican Trench, the South Sandwich Trench in the Antarctic. And so they're actually doing real work, scientific work. And they have an excellent Hadel marine biologist on staff, Alan Jameson from England. Hadel being, of course, as in Hades, those deepest parts of the ocean beyond 6,000 meters, between 6,000 and 11,000 meters. But what the importance of going down there, although it's still characterized, I know last year when Victor made it, I was on that expedition last year. I didn't dive, but when he made his first dive to Challenger Deep, it was one of these new world record, which he did. He found it a little deeper than I got. And they found a bit of trash on the seafloor at the Challenger Deep. And that was the big headline, sort of news at 11 on the TV. But that wasn't the import of the thing. The import of the thing was a safe, reliable system, which has been implied with our discussion now. Kelly said how many dives have been made there that could be productive equipment on board, do good scientific work. So now they're really beginning to produce a lot of good science from these great depths. And so what, more than what I did and what Jim Cameron did with his one dive in 2012, the repetitive dives with a proper scientific staff on board the mothership. And by the way, Alan Jameson also has made dives in the trenches. So he has a direct viewing, if you were, of the area of his scientific interest. They're beginning to do real work down there and productive work. So I think especially what Victor's done 2 years in a row, 5 Deeps in 2019, and now the Ring of Fire expedition this year, has made it a place of great curiosity to many deep ocean biologists and geologists, which I think in my time, they were very envious that I got there, Jacques got there, and wished they might be able to do that someday, but it was kind of like dreaming of the moon or something like that. It was a nice thing to think about, but you know, you never go there, never be there. Now you can. And I think that's, we've converted in 6 decades from an interesting adventure to doing serious work, productive work, important work, because the deep trenches were kind of left out of ocean exploration for until recently, really, last couple, 3 years. Why? Because if you can dive to 6,000 meters or roughly 20,000 feet, you can visit 98% of the seafloor of the world ocean. Well, if you're a bean counter, that is, you have to finance and pay for these things. And if you're an engineer, you can design and pay for just a little over half the full depth of the ocean and see 98% of the seafloor. So, you know, that's kind of a pretty good ratio.
Yeah.
You say tooth to tail ratio, but it leaves out these fundamental deep places in the ocean. And if we're going to understand the mechanics of how our planet works, like plate tectonics and all of that, then you've got to be able to get down and directly investigate these things, whether it's a manned submersible or an unmanned system. You've got to be there to get the data and try and figure out what's going on. And every time they go down these trenches, you upend some of the old theories of what's happening down there. That's not surprising. You've not had that many visits, as Kelly just indicated, how many people have been down there. So I think we've seen it migrate from adventure to productive work, and it's focused a great deal of scientific interest now on going to these hadal depths below 6,000 meters and doing useful work, even though it's only 2% of the seafloor of the world ocean. It's vital to understand because it's fundamental to our understanding of how the oceans work.
Well put. Indeed, that is so important. And I want to come back to that in a second. But Kelly, what were you going to say about that?
Well, from my standpoint, not being a scientist, that Victor made it clear that part of his intention, aside from now being the first father and son to have visited the Challenger Deep, which is personally a pretty incredible thing, was to show that this is not just anymore. It's not just something that a very few highly specialized scientists get to do. This now can be something that you can stick somebody in this equipment and get them to anywhere in the ocean. And that bodes well for everybody. I'm not talking about tourism. I'm talking about the fact that it's not a specialized, it's still quite difficult and very expensive, but that curve is flattening. And to know that the technology has come and is continuing to develop so quickly from 2012 when Jim did it, at the time technologically marvelous submersible, to now we got 2 people in this thing and they can keep going back every other day. And as Rob McCallum from EOS said, it's like our moonshot every other day.
Wow.
To have something that technologically complicated, to be able to do that over and over again with very short intervals between, to me is aside from the personal thing, my dad going, me, the technology moving so quickly is pretty incredible.
You don't have to look any further than that diving helmet behind Don to remember how quickly things have changed. Hey?
That's all I've got left of a commercial diving company that I owned at one time. That's the only remainder of a direction I shouldn't have gone with my time and my treasure.
Well, things are changing quickly, that's for sure. And I think what I think some of the outcomes are of what you guys are doing is helping to connect people to the ocean.
And Jeff, let's make sure we give a shout out to the Chinese, because we know, Kelly and I know, how difficult it is to develop, design, and field an expedition, especially when you're new at it, because the Chinese, their experience with manned submersibles is something like 8 years in a culture that had no previous history in building these kinds of devices, manned devices, submersibles in the ocean. And just, I think was early part of this month or last month, their three-man submersible dove Challenger Deep. I don't have any information how many times they've done it, but I know some of the players and the organization in China that put all of this together. It's amazing technological feat. In my view, no matter what you think of the political differences between China and the United States, or for that matter, Russia, uh, the more eyes and brains you can get into the ocean to do useful work
Mm-hmm.
enriches all of mankind.
Yeah.
So if we can set aside the political differences and just celebrate the fact that we've got another player in the game, it's pretty good because I think they're going to add to the body of knowledge and hadal oceanography, if you will, just like Victor has with his work. And we're going to see not only the manned submersibles, and I while they're very interesting, we're always interested in what people are doing. I think a lot of the heavy lifting in the deepest ocean will be done with autonomous vehicles, underwater drones that you can program and go down and do work. There'll always be room for people, as Jim Cameron elegantly put it when he was asked after his dive, why man? In other words, why not a robot? And he says, what kid wants to grow up to be a robot? That was his answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the very distinguished American oceanographer, Roger Revelle, who was one of the great legendary oceanographers in our country, headed Scripps at one time and so on. I asked him that once. I said, Roger, why man? And he just, without hesitating, said, because you can't surprise an instrument. Our brain has the capability to be surprised and to adapt to new circumstance and make the most out of that new circumstance. So that's kind of a footnote to all of this.
Well, it's a good footnote. It's a good segue in several ways to where I just want to wrap up today on the opportunities ahead. Indeed, we do need a team effort. United States, Canada, China, Russia. We all share this planet water, which it should have been called instead of planet Earth, and life on land. As I said earlier, we need a healthy ocean. Every other breath we take comes from the ocean, maybe even more than every other breath. So, Don, you had said what your team were doing, you and your team in 1960, was basically writing the book on deep ocean operations, and that leads to the question, like, what do we hope future generations are going to add to that book that you started to write? With the sustainable blue economy as sort of an overarching term, and as you've said, the advancement of technology, we have the opportunity, it seems, to really move ahead with everything from renewable energies to shipping that is decarbonized, sustainable fishing practices, and other innovations and technologies that we can't even understand what might be possible in the next decade. So that's I think something we really need to get the word out about, like inspire that next generation of a different kind of explorer that are going to be exploring sustainable ways of living on planet Earth and planet water. So what you guys have been doing, I think, is just an example of how anything is possible. There really are no limits, and that's the sort of big thinking we need in the not just the next decade, but the next few years ahead. So at Students on Ice, our Blue Future Pathways Initiative is one effort to connect youth to these opportunities and give them the support they need to pursue careers in not just ocean, but also freshwater. But yeah, we're really excited about that, and the messages you guys have shared today, I think will inspire many. Maybe just I'm being given the hook here by the team. We've gone over our 1 hour limit, and we haven't even told any stories really, Don, yet.
We saved that for the ship.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you
that's
go.
right. We'll do a part 2 of this interview. Just we'll call it the Fireside or Seaside Chat with Don Walsh and Kelly Walsh. But any final thoughts to share, guys, before we wrap up today?
Kelly?
Well, I want to say to all my alumni friends who may be watching this, or new students on ice folks that I have yet to meet. There's really nothing like students on ice anywhere in the world, and being a part of this has changed my life for the better, and really made me look at the environment and the oceans and frankly in people in a much different way. It's easy to get kind of a little bit I don't know, morose about the state of things. You get on that ship with 130 students and 90 staff and 2 weeks, and things change, and you change one thing, you change one person in little incremental ways, and it spreads out, and we all go home, we all go to our home states, countries, and whatnot, and share our experiences with other people, and it's an easy way to get people involved, to get people to pay attention, because you can't leave an experience like Students on Ice without being enthusiastic about it, and it sometimes it can be very difficult to stop talking about it, because it's so important, and you want everybody to feel that same excitement about the planet ocean, and about its people.
And I would just add to that, amen. I concur completely. I wish I'd said all of that, but he beat me to it. So, for me, it's a distillate of 6 decades, and for Kelly, it's kind of 1 decade, but it's a consistent throughput message, which has been inspired by your leadership and your creativity and imagination in creating this whole enterprise and then successfully running it for 2 decades. Just an amazing thing. I wish there was a Nobel Prize for educators.
Well, teamwork makes the dream work. You guys are part of the team, guys, and thanks for everything that you're doing. And thanks for your time today, and the conversation will definitely be continuing. This has been a lot of fun, you guys, and
Absolutely.
really appreciate it. So talk to you both soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Later.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.